Think about the last big decision you made. Maybe it was who to marry, what career to pursue, or even what you had for breakfast today. Now here's the unsettling question. What if I told you that you didn't actually choose any of it? That every decision you've ever made might just be the predictable outcome of forces you never controlled in the first place? We live in a world that celebrates choice. From choosing a Netflix show to choosing a life partner, the idea of free will feels like the very essence of being human. But what if this sense of control is nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion? What if your brain, your upbringing, your biology, and even random chance are pulling the strings? Stay with me, because if free will really is an illusion, the consequences are massive. It reshapes how we see morality, responsibility, justice, and even the way we forgive ourselves. By the end of this talk, I want you to question the choices you thought you were making freely and see them in an entirely new light. When we talk about choice, most of us picture a moment where we pause, think things through, weigh our options, and then consciously decide. It feels like the most human of experiences, the very act that separates us from machines or animals, just running on instinct. But here's the unsettling part. Neuroscience suggests that by the time you think you've made a decision, your brain has already made it for you. That pause you feel is more like watching the highlight reel of a game that's already been played. Back in the 1980s, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet ran a now famous experiment. He asked participants to flex their wrist whenever they felt like it, and to note the exact moment they became aware of the urge to move. While participants did this, Libet monitored their brain activity. What he found was startling. Their brains showed signs of preparing to move about half a second before the participants reported consciously deciding to do it. Think about that. Your body is gearing up for action before you even know you want to act. That discovery opened the door to a whole series of studies that have only made the picture more unnerving. Later research extended that window even further, showing that brain scanners could predict a person's decision several seconds before the person reported making it. Imagine sitting in a lab, believing you're about to freely choose between pressing two buttons. Meanwhile, a computer hooked up to your brain already knows which button you're going to press before you've decided. If the computer can predict it, can we still call that choice? This doesn't just happen in laboratories, it plays out in your everyday life. You might believe you're carefully deciding what to eat for lunch, but in reality, your brain is influenced by dozens of hidden factors. Your blood sugar levels, the smell wafting in from a nearby cafe, an ad you saw earlier, or even how much sleep you got last night. By the time you look at the menu and say, "I think I'll have the burger," your brain has already tilted the scale. What feels like a conscious choice is more like catching up to a decision that's already been shaped beneath the surface. It's unsettling because it challenges one of our most cherished beliefs that there's a little me inside my head pulling the levers. Instead, it looks like consciousness often lags behind, narrating events after the fact. Your brain fires, your body moves, and then your mind swoops in to tell a story about how you made it happen. It's less like a captain steering a ship, and more like a commentator describing the game as it unfolds. Now, before you think this turns you into some kind of mindless robot, it's worth pausing. Awareness still matters. We may not be initiating decisions as freely as we think, but being conscious allows us to reflect, to learn, and to adjust how we respond next time. The key is recognizing that the act of choosing isn't as clean and controlled as it feels. The evidence points to a hidden layer, one where decisions take shape before we're aware of them, challenging the idea that free will is as free as we like to believe. And if your brain is already a few steps ahead of you, then who's really in charge? If the science of decision-making shows us that our brains often act before we're aware, then the next question becomes what's really driving those actions in the first place. The answer, though uncomfortable, is that so much of what we call our choices are heavily shaped by forces outside our control, our biology, our upbringing, and the environments we move through every day. Take genetics, for example. None of us chose our DNA, yet it quietly sets the stage for so much of who we are. Your appetite, your energy levels, your temperament, even your risk tolerance are all influenced by the genetic lottery. One person may naturally lean toward being cautious, while another feels drawn to thrill-seeking, and those tendencies don't come from a rational weighing of pros and cons. They emerge from predispositions written into the body before birth. It doesn't mean we're prisoners of biology, but it does mean that the boundaries of our choices are already narrower than we like to admit. Then there's upbringing, which shapes the framework we use to make sense of the world. The values your parents instilled, the neighborhood you grew up in, the schools you attended, All of these factors quietly sculpt how you think, what you fear, and what you aspire to. Imagine two children born on the same day, one raised in a safe, resource-rich environment, with supportive parents, and another raised in poverty, surrounded by instability and limited opportunity. By the time they grow up, their sense of choice is already filtered through two entirely different lenses. One may choose college, because it always felt like an obvious next step. The other may choose work at a young age because survival demanded it. Both feel like they're deciding freely, but those decisions are really the natural outcomes of the circumstances they inherited. Culture and society add another powerful layer. The beliefs we carry about success, morality, and even beauty are shaped less by personal reasoning than by the time and place we live in. A person born in 18th century Japan would make very different choices about family, honor, or career than someone born in 21st. If you've ever wondered why certain paths feel normal to you while others seem unimaginable, it's often because your culture has already written the script and handed it to you. Even the people around us exert more influence than we care to admit. Social psychologists have shown again and again that our decisions shift based on the group we're in. Peer pressure isn't just a teenage problem, it's a human one. You may think you're ordering that salad at lunch because you genuinely want it, but if everyone at the table gets one, odds are good that you'll follow suit. The brain is wired to seek belonging, and that craving quietly guides choices that feel personal, but are really social. What makes all of this so striking is that when we zoom out, our choices often look less like independent acts of will, and more like predictable outcomes of biology and circumstance. Each decision feels personal in the moment, but behind it are invisible strings, our genes, our families, our cultures, and our environments pulling us in directions we never consciously picked. So when we ask, why did I choose this path? The harder question to face is whether we ever truly had another option. If biology and environment shape so much of our behavior, why does it still feel like we're in control? The answer lies in one of the most persuasive tricks the mind plays on us: the illusion of conscious control. Our brains are incredible storytellers, and one of their favorite stories is the one where we are the authors of our own decisions. But when you look closely, that story doesn't hold up as neatly as it seems. Think about a time you blurted something out in anger. The words came tumbling out before you could stop them, and only afterward did you start piecing together reasons for why you said what you said. In that moment your brain fired, your mouth moved, and only later did your conscious mind come in to rationalize the outburst. The same happens in more subtle ways, like when you pick a product at the store. You might explain the choice by saying you liked the color, or the brand's reputation, but research often shows people grabbed the item for reasons they weren't even aware of: placement on the shelf, the music playing in the background, or even something as small as the lighting. The explanations come after, not before. Psychologists call this confabulation, the act of constructing a believable story about why we did something, even when that story isn't entirely true. It doesn't mean we're lying to ourselves on purpose. It means our conscious minds act like press secretaries, smoothing over the messy reality of unconscious processes, with neat little narratives. We don't like uncertainty, so our brains fill in the gaps with reasons that make us feel in charge. There's also the simple fact that consciousness lags behind action. Neuroscience shows us that our brains often initiate movements or decisions before we're aware of them. By the time you're thinking, I'll reach for that glass of water, the neurons responsible for the movement have already lit up. Consciousness then steps in and takes credit, as if it had been in the driver's seat all along. This time delay may be tiny, measured in milliseconds, but it changes the whole story. Instead of steering the ship, our conscious awareness might be more like the commentator describing events already underway. That doesn't mean consciousness is irrelevant. It just means it doesn't work the way we imagine. Awareness gives us the ability to reflect, to adjust course and to plan, but it's not always the origin point of our choice. Most of what happens in our minds occurs below the surface, and by the time it bubbles up into awareness, the groundwork has already been laid. What makes this so hard to accept is that the illusion feels so real. It feels like we're weighing options and deciding freely, and in a sense we are participating. But participation isn't the same as authorship. We are more like editors polishing sentences that were drafted before we even saw the page. If our sense of control is largely a story we tell ourselves after the fact, then the question isn't just whether we're free, it's whether the story itself is the only freedom we'll ever really have. If free will is an illusion, the implications stretch far beyond abstract philosophy. They land squarely in the heart of how we live together, how we judge one another, and how we build the systems that govern our lives. The way we think about morality and justice depends on the belief that people could have acted different. We punish wrongdoing because we assume the person freely chose to do wrong. We admire virtue because we believe someone could have chosen otherwise, but didn't. But if choices are not as free as we think, the whole foundation of praise and blame begins to shift. Take the criminal justice system. It's built on the idea of responsibility. Someone commits a crime, and the law holds them accountable, because they supposedly could have made a different choice. But what if that person's decisions were the result of factors they never controlled? Genetics, brain chemistry, upbringing, trauma, poverty. Neuroscience has already shown that brain damage or abnormalities can push people toward impulsive or violent behavior. Courts have seen cases where scans of a tumor pressing on the frontal lobe helped explain sudden criminal acts. When the tumor was removed, the behavior disappeared. Was that person evil, or just unlucky? This doesn't mean we should excuse every harmful act. Society still has to protect itself. But it does mean that our focus could shift. Instead of centering punishment on the idea of moral blame, we might think more about prevention, rehabilitation, and understanding. If someone didn't freely choose to become who they are, then locking them away purely for retribution begins to look less like justice and more like revenge. A system that accepts the limits of free will might still restrain dangerous people, but it would do so with the goal of reducing harm and creating the conditions for change, rather than simply punishing for punishment's sake. Even outside the courtroom, the idea reshapes how we see everyday morality. When someone cuts you off in traffic or lashes out at you, it's easy to see it as a deliberate choice and respond with anger. But if you recognize that their behavior is the outcome of stress, conditioning, or unseen struggles, your response shifts. Compassion becomes easier. Patience becomes possible. You might still set boundaries, but you no longer carry the same weight of resentment, because you see the behavior not as an attack freely chosen, but as a reflection of forces at play. It also changes how we see ourselves. Many of us live with guilt or shame, convinced we could have chosen better in the past. But if our decisions were shaped by factors we didn't fully control, that doesn't absolve us of responsibility to grow, but it does soften the harshness of self-judgment. We can look back not with endless blame, but with understanding, and then focus our energy on shaping better conditions for the future. When you strip away the illusion of free will, morality doesn't disappear, it transforms. It shifts from blame and retribution toward empathy, responsibility and change. And maybe that kind of morality is the one we needed all along. At this point it might feel like the picture is blue. If our biology, our environment, and unconscious processes are shaping everything, then where does that leave us? Are we just passengers in our own lives, carried along by forces we don't control? That's the natural fear when people hear that free will might be an illusion. But here's the thing, recognizing the limits of free will doesn't mean life is meaningless. It means we need to rethink what freedom actually is. Freedom doesn't have to mean absolute control over every choice. Maybe it's more about how we live with awareness of the influences acting on us. When you know that impulses, biases, and pressures are steering you, you gain a different kind of power, the power to pause, to reflect, and to steer your responses with intention. That pause might not erase the forces pushing you, but it gives you room to shape how you interact with them. Think of it less like being a writer with a blank page, and more like being an editor who works skillfully with the draft they've been handed. Take habits, for example. You didn't choose your cravings or your natural tendencies, but you can bring awareness to them. You might notice that when you're stressed, you reach for junk food, or that when you're tired, you snap at the people around you. That recognition doesn't magically give you free will, but it does let you prepare and redirect. You can plan healthier coping mechanisms, get better rest, or simply acknowledge the pattern so it doesn't control you blindly. Freedom in this sense is about working with what's already in motion, rather than pretending you're inventing it all from scratch. On a larger scale, this view of freedom shifts how we think about living a meaningful life. If we accept that our circumstances shape us, then one of the most powerful things we can do is create better circumstances, for ourselves, and for others. That might mean surrounding yourself with people who bring out your best side, or designing routines that reduce temptation and increase focus. It might also mean supporting systems in society that give others a fair chance at opportunities you may have taken for granted. Freedom then is not just personal but collective. By shaping environments, we help shape the kinds of choices that are possible. This way of thinking also brings a surprising sense of compassion.